murder, mysterious malfunctions, and misdirection. Hello, friends. Thanks for visiting. Wires, Winks, and the War Department waltz. John Wilkes Booth, that dastardly thespian, having just performed the most catastrophic act of method acting in American history, leapt to the stage, limped theatrically off, mounted a horse, and audaciously galloped into legend. A villain fleeing into the night with the flair of a melodrama's climax. The game, as they say, was afoot. One would assume, given that he'd just assassinated the President of the United States in the heart of the Union capital, the hunt for him would be prompt, fierce, and altogether inconvenient for his escape. Yet, curiously, the hounds of justice, led by none other than Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, seemed less interested in chasing the fox than in admiring the scenery. Lucky for Booth, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton's goal was anything but actually apprehending the erstwhile assassin. Now let us ponder the first oddity in this carnival of curiosities. For 2 to 3 crucial hours after Lincoln's assassination, the telegraph wires, those humming arteries of the nation's news, went dead. Was it Confederate sabotage, divine intervention, or more plausibly, Stanton flipping the metaphorical out-of-order switch? During the war, Stanton had appropriated the role of distributor of all important Washington news items, a micromanaging warlord of wartime information. He sat like a spider in the center of a web of wires, all of which ran conveniently through the War Department, adjacent to his office and under his thumb. He held sway, with the iron grip of a ringmaster, over both the commercial telegraph network and the War Department government system, which transmitted secure news and updates on the war effort. If the chief assassin were to be caught, Booth's name and description had to be broadcast to the farthest reaches of the Republic. These wires would have sung with urgency, yet they went mute, as if the telegraph operators had decided to take a collective nap. Stanton failed to alert the country that the president had just been perforated. Apparently, on the night of April 14th, the commercial telegraph service was down for about 3 hours following the assassination, disrupting communications in and out of Washington. According to New York World War correspondent George Alfred Townsend in his book, The Life, Crime, and Capture of John Wilkes Booth. Within 15 minutes after the murder, the wires were severed entirely around the city, excepting only a secret wire for government uses, which leads to Old Point. I am told that by this wire, the government reached the fortifications around Washington, first telegraphing all the way to Old Point, and then back to the outlying forts. This information comes to me from so many creditable channels that I must concede it. The commercial wires were severed entirely around the city within 15 minutes of the assassination. The War Department's telegraph system hummed along just fine. A convenient coincidence, much like finding your front door kicked in, the safe empty, but the family dog untouched. Now, if the conspiracy ran so deep that the telegraph wires of the mighty Union capital were snipped by rebel saboteurs, we'd be talking about a veritable army of cable-cutting phantoms with a detailed map, wire clippers, and nerves of steel. But reality, always less exciting than a dime novel, offers us a far less operatic conclusion. By the morning of April 15th, the wires, like Lazarus, were up and humming again, not limping, not sputtering, fully restored, as if nothing had happened. A midnight repair crew working with the speed of Hermes, which makes Townsend's wires were severed theory wobble like a table at a saloon. After all, even in our current age of miracles and gigabytes, nobody reassembles an entire 19th century telegraph grid by gaslight in the middle of the night, while half the city is panicking and the other half drunk. So the wires weren't cut at all. Perhaps they were merely resting. A temporary and convenient case of telegraphic narcolepsy, just long enough to give Booth and his gimpy leg a golden head start. How fortunate for Booth. The telegraph blackout had all the fingerprints of an inside job. Slick, quiet, and suspiciously convenient. An outsider could possibly have disrupted the system by cutting the wires to the main batteries, but these were guarded like the crown jewels and impossible to approach undetected. No outsider could have tiptoed in to pull the plug without raising alarms. And even if our imaginary saboteur had managed to get close, surely he wouldn't have gently coaxed the wires into a polite little short circuit instead of smashing it to bits. No, a real saboteur with half a spine and some southern flair would have gone full scorched earth. Explosives, smoke, and maybe a dramatic monologue for flair. But instead of sparks and fire, we got a sleepy hiccup in service, wrapped in silence and tied with a bow of bureaucratic indifference. The whole affair has the air of a stagehand dimming the lights for dramatic effect, only to flick them back on when the villain's safely off stage. One would think the mere whiff of a traitor lurking in the sacred sanctum of the Telegraphic Corps, keepers of the Republic's electric tund, would have stirred Stanton into a frothing frenzy of investigations. But no, not a twitch, not a peep. Just the sound of crickets and a heavy curtain quietly drawn across the whole affair. After all, why go hunting for snakes under the rug when you're the one who swept them there? The official story goes that the outage lasted about 2 hours, just long enough for Booth to get a patriotic head start. And despite the miraculous resurrection of telegraphic life in the early hours of April 15, there was never an investigation. Major Eckert, Stanton's telegraph chief, was later quizzed by a House committee in 1867. His response? A shrug, a yawn, and a casual, "It did not at the time sufficiently important, as the interruption only continued about 2 hours." Not important. A president lies dead, an assassin gallops free, and the telegraph's silence is dismissed as a minor inconvenience? For decades, the blame was laid squarely at the feet of Booth's Confederate gang. Rascally Southern saboteurs, fiendishly clever, but also, apparently, full of remorse, as they restored the system themselves before dawn. A thoughtful touch from men otherwise bent on national chaos. The plot thickens with the first dispatch. Penned at 1:30 a.m. in the morning, a full 3 hours after Booth took his final bow and exited stage left on horseback. Worse yet, this epistle to the nation didn't take its first electric stroll through the wires until 2:15 a.m., nearly 4 hours after the president had been ventilated. But the real sleight of hand, the telegram, once the wires sputtered back to life, did not include the name of the man who shot Lincoln. You'd think John Wilkes Booth would have been printed in letters so bold they burned through the paper. Instead, John Wilkes Booth was treated as classified information. Stanton and Chief Justice Carter of the District of Columbia immediately established a preliminary court of inquiry conjured from shadows and candle wax. And there, right on cue, a gaggle of theater-goers identified Booth. Among them was Harry Hawk, an actor colleague and sole occupant of the stage when it all went down. Harry Hawk stood up and declared in tones usually reserved for biblical prophecy, "I believe to the best of my knowledge that it was John Wilkes Booth." He was rushing towards me with a dagger, and I turned and ran, and after I ran up a flight of stairs, I turned and exclaimed, "My God, that's John Booth." In my own mind, I do not have any doubt but that it was Booth. Loud, clear, no ambiguity. Yet Stanton sat on this information like a dragon hoarding gold. So the name didn't make the guest list for the telegram. Just a vague, ghostly mention of some assassin. It was as if the murder had been committed by the Holy Spirit. One begins to suspect that Booth wasn't the only actor in town working off a script. It wasn't until 3:55 a.m. that Booth's name was finally dropped into a telegram to Baltimore. 5 hours after the shooting, sans description, sans horse, sans anything but a name. Not even a watch out for the limping guy with a mustache and messianic delusions. The 4:15 a.m. wire, conveniently too late for the morning papers, also omitted the name, perhaps out of deference to Booth's privacy. A telegram sent to the police chiefs of northern cities contained no mention of the name Booth. What are we to make of this? The nation sent on a manhunt without a map, a name, or a clue. One might be forgiven for suspecting that someone didn't want Booth caught. The hunter dawdled, and the hunted rode free. If Stanton truly wished to nab Booth, and that's a philosophical question worthy of Socrates with a telegram machine, then his strategy was baffling in its serenity. For a man who controlled every wire, whisper, and war bulletin in Washington, he moved with the urgency of a sloth in slippers. The silent wires and tardy dispatches gave Booth a sporting chance to vanish into the night, leaving history to scratch its head and chuckle at the absurdity of it all. If you control the wires, you control the truth. Stanton understood that truth delayed is truth denied.